Hello everyone, welcome to Decentralized Clinical Trials Digital Week, brought to you by the organisers of the Global Clinical Trials Europe event and content series. My name is Lena Shaw and I'll be your host for today's session, titled The Role of Technology in Increasing Patient Completion Rates, Insight from Decentralized Women's Health Medical Device Trials. First, I'll cover some quick housekeeping items. If you experience difficulties with audio or advancing slides, refresh your screen with F5. If you're experiencing other issues, hit the question mark button to receive assistance. At any time during the presentation, you can submit your questions into the Q&A window on the left-hand side of your screen. In 24 hours, you'll receive a link to watch a recording of this session. You can also download a few feature articles in the resource list box on the right-hand side of your screen. Let's now begin by introducing our speakers for the session. We have Matti Colbreth-Notario, Senior Vice President of Global Operations from ObvioHealth, and Robin Sutherland, Vice President of Health Resources and Clinical Operations at Renovia. Thank you for joining us today, Matti and Robin. Now I'll hand you over to you to begin your presentation.
Thank you.
Why don't we introduce ourselves? I'm Robin Sutherland. I lead both HR and clinical resources for Renovia. And Renovia is a digital therapeutics company. We're dedicated to improving women's pelvic floor health. We have a FDA-cleared device to treat stress mixed and moderate to severe urge incontinence, as well as strengthening the pelvic floor. We also received, which is exciting, breakthrough device designation just last month for our device to assist with fecal incontinence, and we're looking forward to our FDA clearance coming in early 2022 for that.
Hi, and I'm Matti Colbreth-Notario. I am the Chief Operating Officer for ObvioHealth, a virtual research organization bringing clinical trials into people's homes. So when we met with actually the slide before, please. There you go. When we met with the Renovia team and worked with them to understand their needs, we knew that a collaboration on this project, it would be perfect, right? ObvioHealth would consider ourselves a virtual research organization who specializes in the decentralized clinical trial model, and we knew right from the onset that the proposed Renovia project would work best with a structure like ours. You see, aside from our digital platform, we offer all the typical CRO-related services that you're likely familiar with, like the clinical trial management, data cleaning, analysis, medical writing. But our support, it goes beyond that digital because we have a virtual site team that ensures the direct participant support, which was especially key throughout this particular project. This is a fully functioning remote research team, digitally managed, to particularly support the patient recruitment, enrollment, study coordination, medical oversight, and all of those items that are crucial for the Renovia project and really had a significant impact in the overall success of it. We were able to marry the tech and the service for this project, which provided that comprehensive support of the clinical trial and really more importantly to the research participants. Next slide. Robin, you'll discuss the trial itself.
Apologies, I was on mute. So the objective of our clinical study was to test the efficacy of this device for the treatment of women with incontinence when compared to the current standard of care, which is known as Kegel exercises or pelvic floor exercises. It was an 8-week randomized study with 350 women in the U.S., throughout the U.S., and the study was going to be conducted during COVID when most women either were not traveling or hospital research centers were not open or patients were not allowed to come into the clinic. We needed to find a way to conduct our study and allow for full participation from home. So we decided in early 2020, even before COVID hit, that we were going to explore the idea of a fully decentralized study. And this is how we came to meet with Obvio. Next slide. So the initial concerns that we had with running a fully decentralized or virtual study was the principal investigators. While principal investigators are very comfortable in their clinical setting, how many of them with strong academic and institutional backgrounds would be comfortable with the technology that we'd be introducing? Could they comfortably run a trial that way? And what if our patients had tech support issues? How could we manage that while still providing for their privacy? From a recruitment standpoint, we had pretty stringent inclusion and exclusion criteria, especially as it was going to be done virtually versus at a site. And our concern was what quality of patient would we find? So given the very different approach, we needed to think about how many women will we need to screen and then enroll in order to power the study at completion. We were concerned about e-consent because the folks wouldn't have that face-to-face experience meeting with a clinical research team member. How could we allow for them a forum to ask those questions thoroughly before they fully consented? From a training standpoint, we were looking at training and data entry. And could women up to their 80s be comfortable using both an app to use the Leva device, and could they use an app for the full data capture through the Obvio app? For older women, we weren't sure how well they might do reporting virtually with a smartphone, especially with two smartphones. Some people are very comfortable with technology, some aren't, but sometimes women in their 60s to 80s may not be as comfortable. We were concerned about that. From a patient engagement standpoint, would patients remain fully engaged without actually meeting with a clinical research associated? Would they be compliant? How would we handle that? And then the safety concern is, would we be able to identify AEs quickly and effectively, and what would our process be to do that? And then Obvio was assisting us.
So we had to work together to address all those concerns and be very thoughtful about how we, tackled those concerns. But one of the first concerns that we had to tackle was the challenge with the recruitment of this population. Women just face a unique set of female-specific health challenges, yet somehow women are often underrepresented in research, and clinical trials targeting women's health are just not as prominent. So you can imagine that these intimate topics can often be uncomfortable for women to discuss publicly in a clinic, therefore the need for a more decentralized, model. And aside from that, of course, women are just notoriously busy. We're not often prioritizing, women in their own care, and they prioritize others' care ahead of their own. So participating in a clinical trial, it can be perceived as yet another thing on the to-do list, which really was a tough sell. So we knew that the decentralized study design we had planned to use for the study would alleviate many of those challenges for women, and using this model simply made it just a lot easier for women to participate and ultimately complete the study. The women, they remained engaged and retained through the end of the project, and when the study was completed, we were able to collect all of the data that we needed for this project. Next slide.
So we know that we are the first sponsor to run we are the only study to have launched within the urogynecology that was fully virtual. And so that was exciting for us, and we took this plunge. And we had to weigh the risks and the benefits of doing it. And we worked pretty hard to devise a protocol and then processes to be sure that it would be as smooth and seamless as possible given the fully virtual nature of it. Next slide.
And just like Robin said, being one of the first fully virtual studies, or the first virtual study in this space, meant that we needed to get really creative with our recruitment service. That meant that we needed to really study the target population's purchasing behaviors, their internet search behaviors, and then target just the right participant to place the ads in front of them and increase our chances to recruit them. And having that benefit of the digital and social media targeting, it alleviated the need to rely on site-specific population removed all geographic boundaries, and it just enabled, the participants to participate from their home, avoiding the constraints and the time that's associated with, traveling to the clinic sites. For the Renovia project, we used a variety of creative ads in a more iterative approach, focusing on the ads that had high click-through rates and changing the ads that really didn't. We placed the ads on several social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, and a few others. And then once the participants clicked on the ad expressing initial interest, they were taken to a landing page, which gave them a bit more detail on the project and then allowed them to complete the pre-screening questionnaire. We then moved them through the process from there. So this approach, which more carefully targeted the Renovia participants based on their interests and served up the relevant and relatable content, helped us to recruit the patients much, much faster than you would expect the industry benchmarks to provide. Next slide. So in the case of the Renovia trial, we had an assumption that we might need to target younger and older users, a bit differently. And sure enough, this turned out to be the case. So we started off with a nice library of images tailored for this project and to the age group, but we needed to show several of the images to see which ads worked best for the three demographic targets. So we looked at the click-through rates and determined that for our more mature audience, the ad that works best was on the far left, which shows, ladies' undergarments on a clothesline, something that we suspected, that age group may likely relate to. But for the middle-aged women, the travel images shown here in the center worked best. And for the younger population of women, the keyboard image was ideal, which typically tailors to that age group. So this kind of sophisticated recruitment method seems like it would be expensive, but interestingly enough, this method is quite cost-effective. You'll see here that the cost per click was somewhere between $1 and $2, which is a great cost savings for our client, Renovia. As the audience got younger, the cost of the ads went up because naturally it was more difficult to find younger women with pelvic floor disorder. But it was a great tool that we used to be able to enroll our participants quickly and effectively. Next slide. All right, so once the participants were recruited, the onboarding process became a collaboration between ObvioHealth and our partners. So we selected clinical sites based upon specific criteria. So the University of New Mexico had done some clinical research around the use of apps in women's health. So we knew that they would be very comfortable with this study. The University of Alabama at Birmingham has a phenomenal lead who is exceptionally well recognized globally for her work in urogynecology. The research team had worked with us on 2 previous studies, so we knew that they knew LEVA inside and out. Mass General, we've worked with on previous studies, and they were happy to work with us around AEs. And Kaiser Permanente, their PI worked with us as the final qualifying physician to allow us to enroll our participants. We also brought in a third party who had extensive clinical study and monitoring experience to run our logistics so that we would be in full compliance with GCP. And then following the onboarding with the LEVA app, the clinical research assistants at both UAB and UNM supported our patients by having 3 phone calls, making sure to answer any questions that they had for training and for the use of the app. And the information that we use is really very much standard of care and created by the Urogynecology Association. Next slide. So this was a great collaborative effort, right? And we each had our roles. We each had assignments of what it is that we needed to do. But for the pre-screening piece of it, as soon as the participant passed that initial pre-screening process, they signed the electronic consent form and completed the actual screening process. At that time, the PI and the remote support team were automatically alerted via the portal that they were participants ready to be cleared or alerts ready to be reviewed. So after they were cleared and met the eligibility criteria, the participants were then enrolled and they were randomized. Those system programmed alerts are actually used throughout the entire trial to alert the principal investigator and the remote support team if there are any adverse events, any missed tasks, decreased compliance, new concomitant meds, or any other items that need to be flagged for the site team so that they can address anything that needed immediate attention with great efficiency. Next slide.
Okay, so we wanted to be sure this was a very balanced study, and we wanted to be sure that any participant received benefit from participating. So if they were in the active control group, meaning they were assigned to perform Kegel exercises, we made sure they understood how to do those. We gave them an instructional video. We had a two-sided placard, and again, this was developed by the American Urogyne Society. And we had those 3 coaching calls to be sure they were doing it correctly and that they understood it. The fact that we did a video and 3 calls is well above any standard of care that women receive in this space unless they're participating in pelvic floor PT. Our test group, who were using the Leva device, they also received 3 phone calls about how to use Leva and the app. Next slide. So in terms of data capture, the participant used the Leva and the app, and that automatically downloaded information to Renovia, so we could be sure that there were no technical issues happening for the patient with either their app or with their use of the wand. In parallel, they downloaded Obvio's app so that they could pre-screen, they could use a Bladder Diary, and complete validated questionnaires. The sites closely tracked progress with completion of surveys, the Bladder Diaries, and use of Leva. Our research assistants from our clinical sites followed up to make sure the Bladder Diaries were completed fully, which is a challenge in any setting, let alone doing it virtually. And ObvioHealth worked to identify any AEs, and they elevated those to Mass General to handle in real time. Next slide, here we are. From a Bladder Diary perspective, we needed to track how much and when our patients drank any fluid. We had questionnaires that they completed at 4 and 8 weeks, including the frequency of urination, frequency of feeling of urge, difficulty emptying bladder, frequency of leakage, and how bothersome it was, as well as questions around any pelvic organ prolapse. So for any of you who are familiar with the UI space, we use the UDI-6 as well as a few other instruments. Next slide.
So, as you can see from what Robin and I have been saying, there was a lot to consider, right? And making sure that we really began with the end in mind. But there were a lot, of gems that we can highlight here for this project that we want to share with you. So our recruitment, number one, was incredibly fast. I mean, we had, over 6,000 responses. We were able to pinpoint by geo-territory and target the underserved and underrepresented populations with pinpoint accuracy. And that was really key for this project. But even with that, we had 6,000 responses. We had 350 participants enrolled in just 14 weeks. So, in the industry, that's kind of unheard of. So we were pretty happy with the rate of enrollment. It was $67 for the enrolled participants, so we saved the client quite a bit of money. I mean, usually it's quite a bit more expensive to do this, especially during the holiday season when we were competing with Black Friday ads and Cyber Monday ads. So it was great to be able to do this at such a low rate. We had a great diversity within our population. We had 20% of the samples were minorities. 22% of the participants were 65 and up. Our oldest participant was 82, as you can see here. So it was very diverse, and so I would say the recruitment was a big success for this project. Next slide. The next, successful element here was we had strong patient engagement. So our virtual site team, which I spoke about earlier, was highly responsive around the participant questions. How to use the app, how to consent, if they had any tech support challenges. We were able to monitor that closely and monitor the adherence closely so we could reach out to the participants and chat with them if they ever needed to or if we saw that the compliance was dropping. We have daily reports from our own database that indicated if someone had not used the device for 2 days, and if they didn't, then the site team would reach out with a gentle reminder to get them back on track. So We even had the ability to go as far as tracking every time someone didn't do a lift and then kind of remind them. But we also monitored the tech issues. The participants had the ability to chat within the app with ObvioHealth's virtual site team and the Renovia's internal team if they needed any help with the device. The team would assess the issue and troubleshoot the device to see what was happening and bring resolution so that the participant would continue on with research-related tasks. So all of this helped in maintaining all of our patients and getting them through completion. Next slide. Which leads me to talk about, the completion rate. So our completion rates were pretty impressive. It's not just the compliance rate here, but the retention rate is so important for every trial. Most of our participants enrolled into the study and went all the way through the end. The completion rate you can see here is 91%, which I think is a bit unusual, but the decentralized clinical trial model facilitates those kinds of completion rates. Another interesting finding here is that our older participants that were 65 and older had a higher rate of completion than the younger population. I think lots of times people think, the older population won't be able to manage the app or the technology, but you can see here that that wasn't the case. Our coach team also provided a lot of concierge service, and they were highly attentive to our participants so that the participants felt like the app and the device was easy to use, and they felt that the coach team was, helpful to them. So I think Robin would agree that, that would have been a different outcome, I think, without the virtual study team.
I would. And just for context, at the same time, we were looking to close out a trial at a site. It was a one-site study. And we ended up with only about 62% completion rate because we were trying to end it in July 2020, and most people would not come into the clinic for their follow-up, or the clinic was closed. And we were not successful being able to mail and have returned paper surveys. So we're really very grateful that we had the opportunity to partner with Obbio in this space.
Thank you, Robin. Next slide. So, the completion rates really are in part to, our virtual site team, which we call our coach team, coach standing for Clinical Oversight Coordination Hub. And they were there and available to address the participant questions and concerns and to follow up when they saw the compliance lagging, as I said earlier. This team of investigators and coordinators, they're able to support the daily management of the participants in our trials. And in this trial specifically, as a result of their participation and their involvement, we were able to get ahead of any drop-off in terms of patient participation. I think the expected enrollment number was 350, and we enrolled 369 participants in a matter of 3.5 months and completed 323 of those. The coach team also is responsible for capturing adverse events in near real time and processing them right away. And how that worked is that we ask the participants on a daily basis, how they're doing or to report any kind of adverse event that they have. And, that's a huge benefit because with this model, the investigator is now able to process that adverse event in real time by contacting the participant, getting all the information, finding out what medications they took, if any, if they stopped the product, and then, of course, assess causality. Because we have this patient support team along with the collaborative teams available from Renovia for our participants, the AEs, they were captured and processed in record time. Next slide. And to save the best for last, we achieved statistically significant outcomes on the LEVA device and over the active control Kegel groups for the primary outcomes. So you can see here the primary outcomes, UDI 6 is the urinary distress inventory, was statistically significant between all time points. Both groups improved, but the test group improved significantly more at 4 weeks and even more so at 8 weeks. The LEVA group had significantly less urinary distress than the Kegel group. And for the secondary outcome of perceived improvement, by 4 weeks, there were statistically significant more LEVA device subjects, about 20%, than Kegel subjects, which is about 10%, who felt much better or very much better. And this improved at week 8 when there were 29% of the Kegel participants felt that they were much better or very much better compared to baseline in comparison to 44% of the LEVA device participants who were much better or very much better. So you can see here that the data proved that the LEVA device worked. But that didn't come without, of course, the uphill climbs at first that we had to work through together. I mean, it wasn't easy to get this set up, and we did have a few challenges to overcome before we rolled right into Easy Street. And, Robin's going to share with you a few of the issues we had to fix to get this project off the ground.
Yes, so in order to be able to have a data capture app be effective, especially as we were targeting some women 65 and up, one of the challenges was to be sure that the screen display was going to meet their needs. So we needed to increase the size of the font on the screen, and we needed to be sure that there was, for example, just one question for each survey on a screen at a time, because if there was any confusion about where a patient would check off or indicate a number, then that could throw off our surveys and jeopardize just data accuracy. So we needed to work on that. The Bladder Diary, it was a bit of a challenge because it was all based on the Greenwich Mean Time, whereas we had women who were scattered over 4 time zones in the U.S. And it was becoming a bit of a challenge to understand what occurred on what day, when the voids were happening, when the leaks were happening, when they were having something to drink. So that was something we needed to resolve. And then we realized that we really do need eye-to-eye connection, face-to-face connection, because while we did well having patients complete, it was actually an amazing completion rate. When someone looks you in the eye, even if it's over Zoom, there's a bit of a relationship that's built. And so we realize in the future that is something that will be built into our studies.
So we listened to all that. We took that all in, and we corrected those issues and converted them into, like she said, lessons learned, like Robin said. And we really did learn quite a bit from this study. So to all those items that Robin just talked about, the Bladder Diary, the follow-up surveys, the timestamps, all of those, we corrected all of them immediately, which we have the opportunity to do that, to pivot right away. If we see something that's not quite correct, we have the opportunity to immediately pivot, make the change within our system, and get the improved process going. We're also currently working on upgrades for our next-gen app. We're building in much more flexibility and modularity for our projects, making it far more scalable than it is right now even. We're redesigning the consent experience to be more interactive and digestible by adding a video functionality for those televisits, so we have that eye-to-eye connection like Robin was talking about. We're adding new digital instruments and centralized rating or annotation tools on the new platform. And then we also have a study builder, which is new as well. This is going to significantly benefit the client, as it will present a decrease in cost, reduction in delivery time, and improved visibility into the process. So lots of really exciting things coming into our app that were specifically really developed in response to this project and the lessons that we learned from it. Next slide.
Okay, so what we realize is that there is a recipe for success here. When you look at digital recruitment, both for its rapidity, the pinpoint targeting, and the cost, combined with user-friendly apps, combined with a virtual site team, you can very successfully run a virtual clinical study. The app is just easier to use. It's more effective than paper. It means that the data entry is direct. It minimizes overall monitoring time and cost, and it gives something that the virtual site team can respond to and ask questions of pretty quickly. In terms of, in addition to just the use of the app, if surveys weren't returned on time, if a Bladder Diary was slow to be returned to us, then our virtual site team was able to reach out and check in with our patients via phone, via chat, via email, so that we had a really strong way to keep moving them forward, because if we didn't complete at least 299 folks, we were at risk of being underpowered. So they were small but nimble. They were able to customize what we needed for them to customize, yet they had all the resources to support us fully. Also, from a cost perspective, they were highly competitive, so you compare. So when you think about both being nimble and cost-effective, it really was a recipe for success for us as a small and emerging company to partner with them.
And this concludes our presentation. We want to thank you all for participating in our presentation today. We're happy to take some questions from the audience now. Robin and I will be happy to answer those.
Thank you, Matty and Robin, for an excellent presentation. We've received a few questions already, but we'll give the rest of you a moment to enter your questions into the Q&A box to the left of your slides. Before we begin the Q&A, I'd like to run you through some brief announcements. First, I'd like to thank all of our sponsors for sponsoring this digital week. Next, I'd like to introduce a brand new event to the Clinical Trial Series of 2022, Decentralized Clinical Trials Hybrid event, taking place on the 7th to the 10th of March, which offers a fully hybrid learning and networking opportunity with the live in-person experience taking place on March 7th to 9th in Miami, Florida, and the digital experience taking place from March 7th to 10th, offering those unable to travel the opportunity to access valuable knowledge and guidance from the industry's leading experts remotely. Register your pass today at informaconnect.com/decentralized-trials to join the top speaker lineup and gather the insights you need to decentralize your clinical trials for greater diversity, accessibility, and efficiency. Also, be sure to check out the resources list to the right side of your screen where you can download further feature articles. Now back to Matty and Robin for questions. We've got quite a few questions coming in here. First question is, how do you think this technology would be applicable to a mild COVID study? Which players would you include to make the DCT process as smooth as possible? And I'm going to start with Matty for this.
Yes, thank you. Actually, that's a great question. We have just completed a couple of mild COVID studies, and we are in the process of working on a much more complex COVID study. So we've done that, and it's very simple to integrate the technology with a COVID study. So like I said, we finished a few. We used the app with it. We did, again, same thing, recruitment through our recruitment service, and we were able to enroll participants using our app. One of them was a hybrid study, so there was a need for a visit to the clinic. So the participant would go to the clinic at first, get their first assessments done, and the rest of the trial was done from the comfort of their own home. So we were able to use our technology and integrate several other devices like EKG machines, heart rate, pulse, and do a few other vital signs that we were able to incorporate and integrate into our device for remote data monitoring. So we were able to see all of their data and information coming through to our portal in real time when they put on their device. And of course, there was a lot of training involved with that, but we have done it and it was pretty successful. Next question.
Thank you. Thank you, Matty. Another question, which systems did you have to use on this study? In brackets, I've got EDC, safety, RTSM, etc. And did they have to be modified to deal with decentralized trials? Again, could we start with you, Matty?
Sure, yes. So our system is an EDC. So our platform, the ObvioHealth app and platform, is an EDC that we were able to use for this study. It also had, safety tools within it, and the randomization tool is also within our app. We use a slot matrix within our app to achieve randomization for this project. So, of course, we also have a CTMS that we used outside of it for project management. But for the most part, we used, of course, the Renovia devices, our device, and that was sufficient for the trial.
Fantastic. Thank you. And anything to add, Robin?
No, I think Matty covered it there beautifully.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, our next question, we have, can you repeat what the population percentage was in the eldest brackets, and do you have diversity data on that? What was the eldest population demographic?
Yes, it's 22%.
Sorry, go on.
Oh, so this is Robin. 22% of our population was age 65 to 82, and we have the data on diversity within that population, but I didn't run that separately. happy to do that if you'd like to email us and give that to you. But we overall were 20% of underserved women throughout the U.S.
Thank you so much. Okay, and then another question that's just come in. What about monitoring of the data? Was it done in-house by CRAs?
We have remote.
Fantastic. Sorry.
We have remote data monitors that were able to remotely monitor all of the data. Our data management team also was managing all the data as it was coming in, but we do have in-house remote data monitors that were monitoring the data.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, next question. How can you ensure good collaboration between the virtual site and traditional sites?
So we have to be very thoughtful about that as well, because we had a traditional site, we had the virtual site, and what we did is that we developed a responsibility matrix ahead of the project. So we had to list all of the responsibilities that were going to be needed for this project, and then who was doing what. And we, of course, agreed on that. We did that collaborative effort, and then we worked towards that matrix. So whatever the responsibilities were for the site team, the actual brick and mortar site, they did those, and then the virtual sites did the ones that were assigned to them. So it actually worked very, very well. Once we thought it through and put the responsibility matrix, it was a very great collaborative effort.
And let me add to that, because it was a great collaborative effort, but as a fully virtual study, and the first one that we were aware of, we wanted to be sure that we'd left nothing to chance and that everything was managed in real time. So we held a daily 15-minute meeting of the clinical sites, of the Renovia virtual team, the Obvio virtual team, and Renovia, so that we made sure everybody was fully trained in terms of our entire team. Any technical support issues were addressed. If the Renovia team needed to go deep and figure out something that Obvio's virtual team could then communicate with the patient about, we did that. And it made a lot of sense because we had very few missteps. It was actually a great process, and eventually it got down to be a 5-minute daily meeting. So we think that was phenomenal collaboration. We thank Obvio for participating in that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Another question that's come in. How did you manage the AEs and the SAEs virtually?
Yes, we get that question all the time, actually, and I love to explain it because coming from the traditional clinical trial, industry, this to me, this is one of the biggest benefits and biggest gifts that the decentralized clinical trial model has, and that is through our app, we're able to ask the participants every day. They have a daily question that says, are you feeling okay today? If they say yes, we say thank you, and they move along. If they say no, the system has built-in intelligence to then start deploying a set of questions to the participant to get information on that AE. So if they say no, it'll say, okay, well, tell me what you're feeling today. They enter free text there, and then it'll say, when did this start? When did this stop? Did you take any medication for it? Did you stop the product? These are all just built-in system intelligent questions that are deployed automatically. If they say, yes, we took a medication for it, then the concomitant med page will automatically deploy, and it'll start asking, well, what medication did you take? They free enter the text there. How much did you take? When did you start? When did you stop? And then once the system has collected that information, it will then alert our virtual site team, so our principal investigator or our investigators and our coordinators, that there has now been a change in health status that has been reported for this participant. At that point, the investigators will review the information that has come in through our system and will then reach out to the participant to ask further questions about that and process that AE through resolution or, of course, completion of the trial. So to me, that is, a great benefit, that sometimes, in traditional trials, when the participant leaves the office, you don't find out about those adverse events until the next time you see them. It could be a week, a month, 2 months, who knows. But here, because we're asking that question every day, we're collecting that information in near real time.
Thank you for that. Another question we've got coming in. One of the challenges of traditional studies is that the patient population recruited is not truly representative. But given the penetration of smartphone changes with age, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, do you have any concerns that you've changed one not truly representative population with another?
Why don't I take that? Yeah, so I actually feel very good about what we did because we had Obvious Recruitment team target underserved areas, some rural areas where women may not have been as likely to participate. We also targeted some retirement community zip codes so that we were sure that we would be able to target a number of women over 65. And so I feel like we did a pretty strong job recruiting from underserved populations and took all comers for pre-screening. But really, it's the ability to be nimble with your targeted ads that allowed us to shift to be sure we did serve rural and underserved communities. I feel really strongly that we did a great job within a 3.5 to 4 month period of recruitment.
Thank you for that. And next question, given the level of patient engagement driven by patient compliance and adherence, do you think you will need to commercialize the product with the same level of engagement to realize the clinical benefits you've demonstrated in the clinic? And I'll ask Robin for this first.
Yes, so that is a fantastic question. And we're already FDA cleared, and we have an entire LEVA Women's Center that provides coaches to women to support them through the journey from the moment they are prescribed LEVA through actually 12 weeks, with the most intensive work being done in the first 4 weeks with them. When we designed the clinical study, we needed to be more balanced. And so that is why we had standardized questions that would be asked, and only those would be asked during the course of the clinical contact with those in the LEVA group versus the active control T-Gold group. I will tell you that we're about to submit a manuscript on the research commercial users. It's much better than our clinical study because they have the support of these women who are asking questions about what would it mean to be dry? What would it mean if you could, jump on the trampoline, referee your children's soccer matches, etc. And we have phenomenal outcomes because of women being more supported. But again, clinical research and academically rigorous clinical research, we had real limitations.
Thank you. Another question, adding free text can be problematic with interpretation. Is there anything you have done to help alleviate this issue? I think, Matty, can you help with this one?
I'll take that one. Yes, thank you. So, Amy, we actually thought about, doing not the free text, right? Just having the drop downs from the WHO drug or the Medra dictionaries. But that didn't work out so well because what was happening is that when somebody would put in an adverse event or let's say a medication and they wanted to put in Tylenol and they put TYL, and if something else popped up, that's not a great example, but if something else popped up, sometimes they might just select that one right away and it might not be the exact medication they were taking. So we were actually running into a lot of problems using the dictionary because we had the dictionaries built into our app, but once they were using the dictionary, we had a lot more inconsistent medications that didn't go with the adverse event that they were reporting. So we implemented the free text. So they put in free text, and then we have our coders in the back that do use coding programs to be able to properly code all the meds and all the adverse events. And if something is wonky, it doesn't seem quite correct, the virtual site team will reach out to the participant to seek clarification for that particular AE. But that method proved to be much more precise than having them enter a drug that they actually didn't really mean to enter, that just selected it from the drop down.
Thank you. And a further question, can you explain how you had such high completion rates given no prior experience in running an RCT fully virtually?
I like that question. I'm going to tag team this with Robin, but I'll start saying, well, we do have prior experience in running, RCTs virtually or DCTs. This is our 4th year, so ObvioHealth is relatively a new company, but we've been in business for 4 years. We've now completed 53 trials. I think we're working on and completed quite a number of those. So we definitely, at the beginning of our journey here with the decentralized clinical trial model, it was definitely an uphill, climb, because we had to figure out what was the best way to ensure those completion rates, to ensure that participants were engaged and were completing the trial. And, using that virtual site team and engaging the participants and supporting them properly throughout the trial was really helpful. So by the time we've come to work on the Renovia trial, we had already a few trials under our belt, and we sort of knew the right recipe to, have these participants enter and complete. So I don't know, Robin, if you want to add anything to that, because I know it was one of the first trials in this indication in pelvic floor disorder, but that was done virtually. But, we've done other trials virtually in the past.
Yeah, for me, I have about 50 clinical studies under my belt at this point, and I understand patient behavior, and I understand what it takes to engage patients. And I think we used our clinical sites, whether it was the Obvio virtual site or University of New Mexico or University of Alabama, to really be sure that they had that patient contact to get the pull through. So while it was fully virtual, it wasn't without human touch. It wasn't fully digital. So I think that is part of what allowed us to have such high completion rates. I think if it was a site where there was no human contact at all, it might have been a lot harder to pull them through. But I think this hybrid approach made all the difference in the world.
Thank you. We've got one other question that's just come in. They were just asking about the location of this project. Was it only US sites, or do you have DCT experience in other countries like Europe?
So for this particular project, it was run in the U.S. alone. However, we do have DCT experience in, other countries in Europe and Asia Pacific. We've now completed quite a number of trials actually in Asia Pacific and in Europe. We're getting ready to start a new trial there. So we do have a presence in those countries. Now I will tell you that the DCT model is more prevalent here in the U.S., but it is becoming more prevalent in ex-U.S. and other countries. The electronic informed consent is not quite as widely accepted ex-U.S. as it is here in the U.S. But like I said, we're getting there. It's just a matter of educating everybody on the decentralized clinical trial model, making sure people understand, working with the ministries of health, the ethics committees, the IRBs, to have them understand that process, and being able to then catapult the DCT model further into our industry. So we're getting there. It's like I said, it's much more prevalent and much more widely accepted in the U.S., but we've completed trials ex-U.S., so it's definitely working out.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. I think that's all we've got time for in terms of questions. You've had many, so that's great. If anyone had submitted a question that wasn't addressed, please do keep in mind the speakers will reach out to you directly. This session was recorded. You'll receive a notification in 24 hours when the on-demand session is available for viewing. And please take a moment to complete the feedback form so we can continue to improve your Digital Week experience. Thanks again, Matty and Robin, for a great session. And on behalf of Informa Connect Life Sciences, have a great day, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.